Hello, and welcome to Tina Talks. This is episode 3 in a 5-part series on CMMC Made Simple, what every aerospace supplier needs to know. Thank you for joining us. Today, I'm afraid we're going to play the acronym game. And we're going to talk about FCI versus CUI, and hopefully without the headache that you might normally get. The goal is to explain the hardest concept from the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification, but in the simplest way possible. Don't worry if you've confused these terms before. Almost everyone does. So, real talk is that the government is going to pretty clearly define what they consider CUI to be, mark it as such, and indicate that via contract or some other form of communication. All other information that comes from a federal contract qualifies as, you might have guessed it, federal contract information. But what is federal contract information? FCI is information not intended for public release that is provided by or generated for the government under a contract to develop or deliver a product or service to the government. That is a direct quote. I did not make up or put all of those words together to make anything more confusing. FCI excludes information that's provided by the government to the public. For example, a website. Anything that's on a website, a public website, is not considered federal contract information or FCI, or certainly not CUI for that matter. It also excludes simple transactional information. For example, something you would need to process a payment. That's not considered federal contract information. The specific definition, all that long chain of words, is actually defined in Section 52.204-21 of the Federal Acquisition Regulation. Don't I sound smarter just by able to string all of those things together? I'm sure that's what the federal government thinks. So, what are some examples of federal contract information? You can think of contract documents, any award letters, modifications, statements of work, a delivery schedule. Those things are part of contract documents that are considered FCI. Any project correspondence, such as emails or messages discussing milestones, any technical issues or schedule changes are considered FCI. Any internal process plans, like documents explaining how a contractor is going to meet a government spec, that's FCI. Any performance or quality reports that they give to you or that are related to what you're doing in performance of the contract. So that can be logs, metrics, status reports, anything that is affecting or part of government oversight. And then invoices that contain project details. So it can be an invoice for a certain dollar amount. That's not necessarily FCI, but if your billing records describe the services that are tendered, or any of the proprietary methods that are used in performance of that work, suddenly you're including federal contract information. So keep those things in mind. We've talked about FCI. What is CUI? Controlled Unclassified Information. CUI is information the government creates or possesses, or that an entity creates or possesses for or on behalf of the government. It's worded that way in particular so that you'll understand that it's not just about something that the government will provide to you as a contractor, but it could be something you're creating for the government as part of performing the work you are contracted to do for the government. So CUI includes information that a law, a regulation, or a government-wide policy requires or permits an agency to handle using safeguarding or dissemination controls, meaning they're clearly specific controls that are in place for handling that type of information. CUI is outlined in Title 32 of CFR 2002.4, paragraph H. Aren't I sounding smart again? So, what is controlled unclassified information? Some common examples of CUI include medical records submitted to federal agencies which require privacy protections. I think we've all heard of HIPAA. Defense contractor technical drawings or specs, which contain sensitive design information. Again, this would probably be labeled as such. Criminal history reports that are maintained by law enforcement agencies, your FBI record or CIA. Vulnerability data about critical infrastructure like a power grid or a water system. Just think about what could happen if that type of information were to get into the wrong hands. I mean, I think we've all seen a Superman or a Marvel movie or a Spider-Man that has somebody trying to attack the power grid or the water system. Well, that data that describes that is CUI. So the bad guys in those movies, they were breaking the law. They were not compliant with CUI controls. And law enforcement sensitive information, which might include investigative details or operational plans. So any of the particular engineering drawings like that could get into the wrong hands and cause damage to the federal government or the way our government functions and operates. Technical data, specs, any reports that might be marked sensitive. That's all CUI. Now that you know the difference, or at least maybe could better identify what federal contract information is versus controlled unclassified information, why does it matter? Well, the information that you as a contractor are exposed to determines your required CMMC level. Remember, level 1 versus 2 has some pretty significant differences. You know, level 1 has 15 controls and level 2 has 110. Well, that's quite a bit different. Also, it means whether you could effectively perform a self-assessment or are you going to be required to have a third-party assessment and get on that waiting list for our CMMC appraisers to get you through the queue. Those are major differences and why that type of information matters in regards to being compliant with CMMC. Now that you know what the information is, let's talk about what companies actually have to do. Step 1, identify the information. Identify which bucket that information would go into. Is it FCI? Is it CUI? And then responsibly segregate that information. So if you are understanding the differences between CUI and FCI, you need to not be storing those things together in the same document folder or in the same filing cabinet, if that's your thing. And really, you need to then label it because you probably went gung-ho at the beginning of something. Maybe you had a team that identified and segregated, but if you don't label it, who remembers which is which and where the different ones are located? You might know that there's two because one is CUI and one is FCI, but you might not know which one's which. So the easiest way to do this for digital records is to potentially label the folder. On the front end of folders that contain information that's FCI, put FCI. Same from the CUI side, mark it as CUI. Color code those so that it's easy to look at, and right away you and your employees, or just you, can identify, okay, that's the FCI folder, that's the CUI folder, so that you didn't just establish how you're going to identify and segregate and then label, but you're able to continue identifying and then segregating into the right bucket. I hope that this has been helpful in understanding the differences between FCI and CUI, and I hope that I didn't give you a headache. The thing that I would love for you to understand, my golden nugget, is that understanding the information you handle is the very first step in being sufficiently compliant and successful with managing your cybersecurity information. So think about a customer who thought every single engineering drawing was automatically controlled unclassified information. Well, that can't always be true. So it's important that they understand that while I'm sure some of the engineering drawings, which contain sensitive information, were in fact CUI, that just because it's an engineering drawing doesn't make it CUI. That could just be federal contract information and need to be treated in still a controlled method, but not 110 controls. Next up, we're going to address the elephant in the room. What does CMMC actually require you to do? What are the things that are being put in place that are causing so much concern and upheaval in the federal defense subcontractor community? So stay tuned, and don't forget to like and subscribe. And also, if you're wondering, who can you contact for help? Well, it's me. I am Tina Leety. I'm your compliance specialist. My company is Cloud 10 Services. My email address is on the screen. And I created Cloud 10 Services to help you elevate your business. So I hope that this has helped you in some small way. Thank you, and have a great rest of the day.